Happy Halloween, everyone. I am squeezing in one more Halloween card project for you, and this time I am taking a book collection die set and turning it into spell book. So we are going to be adding some ink and building up a vintage look and dimension with our inks today. Some of the products that I'm going to be using today is the book collection die set, Perfectly Wicked stamp set, the Fangtastic Friends add-on, and the costume party stamp set. There are a few other ones that I decided to bring in a little later on, and I'll talk about those when I get to them. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay out the images that I want to stamp and color in. So I have the bats, I have the banner, I have a shelf, and then some potion bottles. I'm inking these up in the Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm stamping these onto Express It cardstock. This is the cardstock that I like to use when I'm coloring with my OLO markers. The first thing I'm coloring in is the shelf, and I started out with as an O 4.3 to do the shelf coloring, and then came in with an O 4.6 and just added a line for the shading. I'll move on to coloring the bats, and for their collection of colors, I have V 7.6, V 4.3, and a V 4.1. So I have a 3 color blend for this. I do have a picture of all of the markers that I'm using today for these images that should be posted over on the Lawn Fawn blog. And that way you can kind of decipher which colors I used. Most of them are a 2 color blend, just for the bats where I did a 3 color blend. So when I was coloring in my bats, I really took into consideration the direction that they're facing. The one that I'm coloring currently, it is facing to the left. So I'm adding my darkest color, which is the V 7.6, over on the right-hand side, and then I'm going to blend it out throughout those other 2 colors that I have. I didn't want to get too heavy-handed or too dark with my colors, so I just kind of limited how far out I was going with that V 7.6. And because I'm coloring on a really smooth cardstock that is really designed for coloring with alcohol markers, I do have a little bit of playtime where the ink is not soaking into the cardstock so much. It's more kind of sitting on top of the paper for just a few extra seconds. And that allows me to go in with those other markers and really get a nice blend between them all. I thought about doing the ears of the bats with a pink, but ended up just using those same V colors that I used for the rest of the body. I had also stamped a spider, which I used that same color combination for the spider. And then I'm going to move on to my potion bottles. So I did clean off the stamp and stamp a couple more of them because I wasn't sure exactly how many I wanted. So for the green, I am using a YG 1.6 and a YG 2.3. I had an idea what color my books were going to be, so I was trying to color the potion bottles along those same lines. For the orange, I used an O 2.7 and an O 2.4. For the red, I did R 0.6 and R 0.4. And then the teal is the BG 2.5 and BG 2.3. So the labels on the bottles are going to be kind of that vintage color along with my banner. I really wanted to go for kind of a creepy, spooky kind of look. And that one I did an O 4.3 and an O 4.1. And then for the glass of the potion bottle, I did WG5 and WG3. So it's like a dark, spooky bottle. Once everything was colored in, I'm going to use the coordinating dies to die cut them out. Now, the spider, I lost my die for him, so I went to a different spider set. I found one that was very similar, but it was a little bit too big. It left too much of a white line, which is why you're not going to see that cute little spider. For the background, I'm going to be doing a brick stencil. So I'm going to have a brick background here. I have 80-pound white cardstock from Lawn Fawn cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I placed that on top of the sticky mat in the stamp wheel. Then I placed the brick stencil over the top. And that sticky mat is going to hold my cardstock and all of those areas of the stencil. So my stencil won't shift on me. I'll be using River Rock ink and a blending brush to do my background. And a lot of this background is haphazardly because it's kind of this creepy place with spell books. So it doesn't need to be perfectly blended throughout the stencil. You can see some areas are going to be really dark, some are going to be really light. It probably would have been smarter for me to start with something like a fog cardstock And then that way the white lines wouldn't be so drastic in here because I do come back over that with my blending brush to tone it down. So I think using like even a darker gray cardstock would be really neat to have that subtle brick stencil in the background. Once I'm done, I will peel this up from the sticky mat, and then I use my stamp chamois to clean off my sticky mat. If I have some areas that are a little dirtier than others, I will bring in a stamp cleaner, but for the most part, the stamp chamois will clean that up for you. I'm also going to use River Rock for my floor. So this is a dark gray wood grain cardstock that I grabbed from my stash. I just added some of that River Rock to the top. Again, it does not need to be perfect. It's just needed to have some coloring on it. I brought my brick stencil into a box to add splatters. I had taken the River Rock and squished that down onto my glass work surface. If you want really nice, kind of dark splatters, I would suggest using like a re-inker. When you're using an ink pad from dye ink, you may, well, and mixing it with water, you're going to get some areas of texture where maybe the ink didn't quite want to thin out with the water. I think it looks really cool in this particular instance, but if you want more thickness to your color, I would use a re-inker. So I went ahead and die cut all of the books that I want to use for my card front using various colors of cardstock from Lawn Fawn. For the inside of the book or the pages of the book, I had used speckled eggshell cardstock and I did a little bit of light ink blending with pizza crust ink. Now I have some purple books. So I really went through kind of some fun Halloween colors. I believe this is sugar plum cardstock with the sugar plum ink. And a little tip is if you're not getting quite the contrast that you want with a purple, come in with a dark blue. This is, I think, Blue Jay. So I added just a little bit around the edge, and it's going to give it that nice highlight in the center there. And you can see I'm using my sticky mat. It's holding not only my cardstock, but also my ink cubes. Whenever I'm going to switch colors, I do take my stamp chamois and wipe up that sticky mat. Now here I came in with orange, so this is a pumpkin spice that I'm adding to it. Again, if you want more contrast to this, for the orange, you could use a red. So I believe I brought in a lobster, and you really don't need a lot of that color, just something to add that extra oomph to your die cuts. And it really makes those pop. Like the purple one is probably my favorite. And another thing to keep in mind is if you use red ink on a sticky mat like this, even when you wipe it away with a stamp chamois or even a stamp cleaner, it is going to stain the sticky mats. That is why mine looks like it does. So I moved on to my green books. For this one, I used LG cardstock and I came in with artichoke ink, which was a perfect combination for doing this kind of creepy spell book look because it has, I want to say, maybe a little bit of brown in it. It just worked really well with LG cardstock. And by using a small detail blending brush, I'm really able to focus in on just the edges of the book and still have that highlight area down the center. Now for this one, I have Tide Pool cardstock, and I believe it is Peacock ink. So adding that depth and dimension all over to the sides. Once I had the main color on there, I'm going to go back through all of those books and I'm adding walnut ink. Now for this, I'm not necessarily blending it on. I'm actually kind of brushing it on. So it's going to look a little scattered, a little dirty, which is exactly what I wanted it to do. And I did that to all of them. Of course, to some of the lighter shades like the orange, I didn't brush it on as heavy. So you can kind of play around with that and test out how they're going to look on those bindings. I came in with the tassels. This was die cut from sunflower cardstock, and I'm ink blending one side of it using number 2 pencil ink. Then I can move on to adhering everything together. So for some of these, there is going to be where you can see the pages or have that kind of area for a book title in there. So one layer I did with the speckled eggshell, the other one I did with that colored cardstock, layered them together just using my tweezers and my liquid glue. There's a couple books where it has some die cut areas, just some little areas, and I wanted those to have a little bit of shine to them. So I just trimmed out a small piece of gold metallic cardstock and added that behind there. Then I can start putting together my card front. So I kind of laid everything out about how I wanted it to go. I'm going to have these stack of books down on the floor and I have my brick background, but it was a little bare for me. So I stamped out these spider webs from Sweet Spiders, I believe it is, and I just stamped them in black ink, trimmed them out with the coordinating die, and I added them onto my brick wall. One of them went behind my floor. So after I attached my floor with a tape runner, I trimmed off the excess, and now I can start building the rest of my scene. So, of course, for my sentiment, which is always the last decision I make out of my cards, I have the banner there and it's just a placeholder. I am not going to stamp or add it to my card front just yet, but I used it as a placeholder so I knew where to place my bats. And a lot of this card front is going to be popped up with various size foam squares. I like to use some thin foam squares, but then when I want something to really kind of be prominent or kind of stand out a little bit more, I'll use the regular thickness foam squares. So the bats were thin foam squares. Most of the books were with a thin foam square. So I'm just kind of stacking those up on the floor, making them a little crooked because a witch is most likely kind of chaotic, probably not very organized. I have some that are going to be kind of tucked behind there on the side, and I will just use my liquid glue for that, and then the thin foam squares for the other ones, and just tilt them a little bit to have that kind of added interest to them. And I will continue that on the other side. I also off screen had stamped and colored in this little crow from Happy Harvest. I think it came from when I was thinking about what I wanted to use to decorate it. I was just thinking of different things that might be with my witch's spell book. So I also kind of was thinking about Happy Harvest. A black cat would have looked really cool here too. I didn't think of that till now. So I'm coming in with my potion bottles. Some of them I'm adding with a regular thickness foam square and others are just thin, having them overlap the spell books. You can see I didn't use the shelf, and that was mainly because I thought it just was crowding the background with the brick. I decided on a sentiment that fit in my banner from the costume party stamp set, and I really liked that font. So I had just stamped that in black ink, and I'm going to now pop that up with regular foam squares. And I only added the foam squares more towards the center where they're not going to get in the way of my bats that are already popped up. And then the last finishing touch is I'm going to take a white gel pen and just add a bunch of highlights to the books, to the bottles. I think it helps them kind of stand out a little bit. So I do have kind of this creepy look to my background and the books, but then we come in with these fun highlights that just really dress them up. I do feel like this card was missing something, and now that I think about it, I really wish I would have done a black cat. That would have been perfect, but I still think this card is super fun using the book collection and turning it into spell books. I will have all of my supplies listed down below in the video description and over on my blog. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy Halloween!